All right. Hi, everyone. We're excited to have you join Registrar Corp for Unpacking U.S. FDA Food Labeling and Ingredient Regulation. What companies must know before exporting. We'll be discussing the ingredient and labeling rules and regulations for food products distributed in the United States. I'm proud to introduce Anna Benevente, Registrar Corp's Director of Product, Labeling, and Ingredient Review, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the College of William & Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box at the top. We've saved time at the end to answer them. And without any further ado, Anna, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Alexis, for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be able to present to you all today. These are the topics that we'll be covering in our webinar. First, we will discuss what every food company must know before they start exporting food products to the U.S., FDA's oversight of foods, and the two important questions that every company must ask related to their ingredients and their labels. In our next section, we'll describe how a company determines if their products' ingredients are okay. We'll go over how FDA regulates food ingredients and designates them as safe, and common mistakes made by food companies before they ship. We'll follow up with labeling requirements, the ones that all food labels must meet. All the general mandatory labeling elements will be described, and we'll go over additional labeling considerations such as nutrient and organic claims. Finally, we'll present to you Registrar Corp's solutions to help your company achieve compliance and ensure trouble-free exportation to the U.S. We'll finish up with our question and answer period and try to get to as many of them as we can. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients across 175 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. We are very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of service to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. Our label review team of experienced professionals hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, human nutrition, pharmaceutical, and cosmetic sciences. We've reviewed over 13,000 products for compliance and take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements for food formulation and labeling. As most people know, the U.S. food market is incredibly large, with revenues of almost $1 trillion projected in 2024. For many companies, exportation to the U.S. is a significant way to increase the value of their businesses and the financial growth of their companies. Companies that successfully export to the U.S. can often count upon a consistent revenue stream in a market that continues to expand. However, many pitfalls can occur between a company and its financial windfall in the U.S. market. FDA regulations are strict, and so a company must ask itself before it exports, what do I need to know? In the next section of this webinar, we'll describe how a company should ensure that its food products are appropriate for the U.S. market. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has jurisdiction over most foods in the U.S. market. Under their authority, they issue strict regulations regarding what ingredients may be used in food products. They also have complicated regulations that govern the labeling of food products. These regulations specify what must appear on the label, as well as rules regarding claims being made about the products. Many companies make the critical mistake of thinking that the FDA regulations only apply to domestic producers, but this is not the case. Imported foods must also comply with these regulations upon entry. FDA inspects foods in port and will not release products that have improper ingredients or labeling, even if the importer intends to change the label after it arrives. Products must be compliant when they arrive at the port of entry. Smart companies will ask themselves two important questions before shipping their food product to the US. First, are my ingredients permitted? Second, is the labeling correct? These two issues are extremely common causes of problems for imported foods in US ports. A company may ask itself why this matters. Many companies ship for years without any issues. However, it is important to note that FDA does conduct inspections in port, particularly on goods from new shippers. If a non-compliant product is found, it is usually detained. Rarely will FDA let non-compliant goods in with only a warning. If a product has an illegal ingredient, it will usually be refused entry, since there's usually no way to remove it from the product. Products with labeling errors can be relabeled if the importer petitions FDA successfully. However, this process is expensive and time-consuming, as FDA must approve the petition and then inspect the goods after relabeling. This process can take months to resolve and can easily damage your business relationships. Also, a package with stickers covering the non-compliant information is not very attractive and could negatively impact sales to consumers. Violations can result in a company being placed on what's called an import alert. This means that all future shipments of the product will be detained without any inspection by the US FDA. And this can cripple your business in the United States. The consequences of noncompliance can be extremely severe. A few years ago, we assisted a large chocolate manufacturer who had 3 shipments of their chocolate stopped in early December. They were detained based on the violations of the general labeling requirements that we're going to discuss today. They were destined for fancy department stores to be sold for the Christmas season. We submitted petitions to request permission to relabel, but FDA did not respond for 2 months. It's important to understand that when you are detained, you are on their time clock, and FDA sometimes will move very slowly. Once approved, it took a few weeks to get the stickers on all the packages, and then FDA took a few weeks to come out and confirm that they were now in compliance. They were released, but not until 4 months after they were initially detained. The company missed the holiday shopping season and Valentine's Day as well, and it was a big blow to their business. Proper labels would have prevented this fiasco. We had a similar situation with a seasoning product that was labeled for the US or for the Chinese market, sorry, not the US, and then brought to the US by an importer interested in selling it here. FDA detained it for labeling violations, including the lack of a nutrition facts panel. FDA refused to accept nutrient values from the manufacturer, though, and insisted that the products be tested by a US laboratory. They gave the importer a very short time to respond, so the importer was forced to pay for an expedited analysis by the lab before we could even begin to create the new label. The importer successfully relabeled the product, but FDA took a long time to come and inspect the shipment. So the entire process took about 3 months. The takeaway here is that detentions are expensive, time-consuming, and a huge problem for your supply chain. They must be avoided at all costs. So how does one go about figuring out whether or not their products are okay or might be in danger of being detained? You have 2 basic steps to eliminate some of this risk. First, is my formulation okay? Conduct a check of your ingredients to make sure that they are permitted in the US. Then, select only those products with formulations that will be acceptable to FDA. Second, is my labeling okay? For these selected products, review the labeling and revise as necessary before shipping. Remember, relabeling in port is expensive and time-consuming if FDA even allows you to do it. Prevent the need for relabeling by making sure that it's correct before you export. Now, many companies are uncertain as to how to determine if their ingredients are acceptable for the US market. In this section of the webinar, we'll explain how FDA regulates ingredients and where they publish these regulations. FDA has three main classifications for ingredients: food additives, substances that are generally recognized as safe, also called GRAS, and color additives. By law, all substances added to food must be approved by FDA through the food additive petition process unless they are generally recognized as safe. GRAS substances are recognized as safe for their intended use by qualified experts, either through scientific procedures, such as testing, or through a history of use in food. Color additives, even those from natural sources like caramel and beet juice, must all be approved by FDA. They are never considered GRAS. In order to figure out if your ingredients fall into one of these categories, you will need to research some specific resources. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations includes all of the food additives and color additives that have been approved by FDA. This also includes regulations where FDA has affirmed certain substances are GRAS. It's important to pay close attention to the regulations, as they will tell you exactly what products and intended uses are covered. For example, some are permitted generally in food, but others may be limited to only particular types of food or for certain specific uses. GRAS status is not limited to these FDA GRAS affirmations. GRAS status is based upon the opinion of the scientific community as a whole. So companies are permitted to self-affirm that an ingredient is GRAS using data that is public or privately held. If a company chooses to self-affirm an ingredient as GRAS, then they should make sure that they have data available in the event that FDA requests proof of their ingredient's status. FDA has a process by which a company may submit what is called a GRAS notice. This informs the FDA that the company has determined an ingredient is GRAS. FDA may then respond whether they have any questions or concerns regarding the company's data and conclusion that the substance is safe. Unfortunately, many companies don't perform any sort of compliance check on their products prior to shipping, and they find out the hard way that their ingredients are not permitted in the US market. One of the most common mistakes that we see are illegal colors. Because FDA must approve every color additive, even those from safe natural sources, many in other markets are not permitted here, such as Ponceau 4R, Carmosine. These are not permitted in the US, even if they are perfectly safe. Other common color additive issues concern colors that are subject to what we call batch certification. It's a requirement from FDA for certain synthetic colors. For these colors, a sample from the actual batch when it's manufactured must be sent to FDA for them to test it. So for example, Allura Red must be certified by FDA as FD&C Red number 40. Brilliant Blue FCF is another example. It must be certified as FD&C Blue number 1. Other ingredients that can cause issues are artificial sweeteners such as cyclamates and dulcin, which are not approved by the FDA. Recently, FDA issued a final order that essentially bans partially hydrogenated oils due to their trans fat content. Products from other markets where they are permitted should not be sent to the US. FDA has certain requirements on other specific ingredients such as stevia. Stevia has purity specifications that must be met, and FDA has an import alert for it, along with other ingredients such as tamarind, where FDA will stop these products and force the importer to prove that they meet FDA's requirements before entering the US market. And finally, CBD. CBD is really confusing because individual states in the US permit it to be marketed, But at the federal level, FDA has said that it is not permitted to be added to food. Once a company has determined that their products are formulated correctly for the US market, it's still incredibly important that the labeling be reviewed to ensure that it is compliant as well. The labeling is the first thing an FDA compliance officer will see when your product arrives in port, so you'll want it to be perfect and not raise any red flags. In this section of the webinar, we'll discuss the mandatory labeling requirements for food products. There are certain statements that must always appear on food labeling, as shown here, that we will discuss in depth in the next few slides. Please note, if you have a dietary supplement, it will be somewhat different, and maybe we'll offer a webinar on that here soon, but note that this is for conventional foods only. First and foremost is the statement of identity, what the product actually is. FDA requires that it be the name specified by law, or the common or usual name used in the marketplace, but not a brand name, or a fanciful name that is understood by the general public. So for example, most of us are probably familiar with the brand Oreo and understand what that is, but that is not a statement of identity. Oreo labels include a statement of identity, chocolate sandwich cookies, to meet this requirement. Another example would be Sprite. So when I say Sprite, most of us probably know what Sprite is, but if you look at the can, you'll see it's identified as lemon lime flavored soda. And that's also in order to meet this requirement for a statement of identity. Now, some products are subject to what is called a standard of identity. This is when FDA dictates what the characteristics are for a product identified by a particular name. This can include permitted ingredients and certain manufacturing methods that must be conducted. Examples include ice cream, jam, margarine, and peanut butter. So there are about 280 standards of identity, so you will want to determine if your product is subject to one. The statement of identity is also subject to special requirements. For example, if there are flavor declarations on the label, if there are juice ingredients present in a beverage product, when a product is in a specific form, and more. The next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container. Tolerances aren't permitted. Solid and viscous products are declared by weight and must include the term or abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are to be declared in terms of volume. Importantly, you must include both metric and imperial terms of measurement. This is another common cause of detention. For example, a product that declares its weight in grams but does not include the amount in ounces. The next and usually most difficult part of mandatory food labeling is the nutrition facts label. FDA has very specific requirements for format, content, and type sizes. Unlike some markets where nutrition labeling is simply based on 100 grams or 100 milliliter amount of the product, for FDA nutrition charts, a serving size is declared based on a reference amount for that exact food, and that exact amount is established by FDA. There are additional dual column chart requirements for products that are in packages that might be consumed in a single sitting. There are also different formats for infant and toddler foods and when there's more than one product in a package. We've pulled together some examples from other countries to illustrate how different the FDA chart is. Here you can see the standard US FDA chart compared to charts from the UK, Australia, and Mexico. Here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from Canada, Argentina, and China. Again, very different. So it's obvious to FDA inspectors when a product comes in with a label that's not in compliance with this requirement. Any inspector that sees this mistake is bound to detain the product and refuse it unless the importer petitions for permission to relabel it. FDA has multiple chart formats that are permitted on food labeling, but subject to certain conditions. To the left, we see the simplified format, which is permitted on certain products that don't have a lot of nutrient value, like sodas and gum and certain hard candies. On the upper right side of the panel, and at the bottom of the panel, we see two tabular charts that are permitted on certain sized packaging. The first one is permitted when a label panel is less than 3 inches tall. The other is permitted on certain smaller packages that can't fit the standard chart or the larger tabular size. And in the middle is the linear format permitted only on very small packaging. If you use any of these nutrition facts panels, you must make sure that your package and your product qualify. FDA's newest regulations for nutrition labeling include mandatory dual column formats for containers that are between 200 and 300% of an FDA reference amount for that food, and also in cases where the product is a unit, like a muffin or a very large cookie, that is between 200 and 300% of the reference amount. The idea being that a consumer could eat the whole bag or the entire muffin or cookie in one sitting. So the chart must show the nutrient values for the serving size, but also the column for the entire container or the entire unit. This ensures that the consumer is aware of the nutrient values, particularly negative values like calories and fat, should they eat the entire package or the entire unit. Most foods, except for single ingredient foods that will declare it as part of the statement of identity, must declare all of their ingredients on the package. Most of these ingredients must be declared by their common or usual name, so no E numbers or INS numbers. Most have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses. They also must be in descending order by weight. There are some exceptions to the rules though. So for certain ingredients like flavors or colors, certain spices, you have some exceptions from the normal rule for declaring by common name. Allergens are an important part of food labeling and a very common cause for product recalls and other issues. Accurate allergen declarations are a significant safety and labeling issue. Now, FDA is a bit different than other markets in that they have 9 mandatory food allergens that require disclosure. Milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, but not molluscan, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, but not gluten generally, soy, and sesame. There are 2 ways that you can declare. You can either declare them in parentheses next to the ingredient in the list, or if it's part of the ingredient name, or you can declare all of them in a contained statement that is adjacent to the ingredients list. Every food product label needs to declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. You may choose any of these 3 options to meet the requirement. Now, please do note that you actually must declare the corporate name, not a DBA or a trade name, and the full address, although you may omit the street address if it is found in a local directory. FDA must have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover a problem with the product. While not an FDA requirement, we always want to mention that it's important to know that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. By definition, this is the country where the last substantial transformation of the product took place, and it must appear on all retail food labels. Also, you must know that only certain abbreviations that have been deemed acceptable by customs may be used. So for example, PRC is not considered an acceptable abbreviation for China, as a US customer may not be familiar with it and would not realize that it stands for People's Republic of China. Conversely, UK may be an acceptable abbreviation for United Kingdom, as most American consumers would recognize that that's what it stands for. Recently, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, issued new rules regarding the disclosure of bioengineered ingredients. USDA maintains a list of foods that are generally considered to be genetically modified. If your food product has an ingredient on that list, or if you know that any product in your food is the product of bioengineering, then you must disclose it on the label. USDA gives several options, including a symbol, to make this disclosure. Even though this rule was issued by USDA, it impacts FDA-regulated product labeling as well. In addition to the regulations regarding the mandatory statements that must appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to other labeling issues such as claims. FDA dictates when such claims can be made. So for example, nutrient content claims refer to levels of a nutrient in the food. Examples include high in fiber, low fat, and healthy. FDA sets nutrient levels that must be met in order for the product in the label to bear the claim. Health claims refer to a risk reduction in disease that may occur due to consumption of the food. A health claim must be pre-approved by FDA. So for example, a claim related to low sodium diets and hypertension and reducing the risk of hypertension would fall under this type of category, and again, must be pre-approved by FDA. Structure function claims reference effects to the structure or function of the body due to consumption of the food. These claims are not pre-approved by FDA, but must be truthful and based on the nutritive value of the food. So for example, calcium builds strong bones, fiber aids digestion. These would be examples of structure function claims. Another common labeling element are additional languages on the product packaging. So please do note that your labels must have all the mandatory statements in English. If any other language is present, then all mandatory statements must appear in that language too. Brand names or mottos may be exempt from this requirement though, because they don't convey any material information about the product. The idea behind this is that there are US citizens and residents that maybe don't speak English. So if there's another language on the label, FDA wants them to have exposure and the information that FDA deems mandatory for food labeling in general as well. Now, due to a strong marketing advantage and consumer desire for clean labels, organic foods are now a significant part of the US market. In order to make this claim, your food will need to be certified by an agent that is accredited by the USDA. Now, the claim itself will be based upon the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, and the agent's information may have to appear on the label. Companies need to be vigilant in ensuring that their labels meet FDA's requirements. So here are 5 common mistakes, many of which I actually found on a detention notice that I was looking at this morning for a company that must not have done a compliance check before they were shipping. And they have 8 different candy products from China that are sitting in port, many with these violations. It's very common for other markets to permit declaring ingredients by E or INS numbers, but that's not the case here. In the example that I saw this morning, they were using E numbers for their colors instead of declaring them by the F, D, and C number for their colors. They also don't have them batch certified, which is a really big problem. We often see companies using nutrition charts that are only permitted on small packages because they don't understand the limitations of their use. Now, because the majority of the world relies on the metric system, many labels arrive to the US without the mandatory declaration in ounces or fluid ounces. It's also very common for labels to bear claims such as high in vitamin A or low in saturated fat, but the product does not meet the nutrient levels in order to qualify for those claims. And then last but not least, if there's any non-English statement on your label, you will probably need to reproduce all of the mandatory statements in that language. So we hope that the information that we presented gives you a good overview of how to check your product's formulation and labeling to determine if it will meet FDA requirements. If you still find that the rules and regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. Registrar Corp has many solutions to help you make sure your labels meet FDA's requirements. We offer varying levels of assistance with our full label comply service, our label check report, nutrition facts, and ingredient review services. We also offer consulting by the hour if you have any other questions or concerns that require an experienced regulatory affairs professional. As I mentioned before, it is critical to make sure that your formulation consists only of ingredients that are permitted in the US market, as well as making sure that the labeling is correct. Again, these two issues are part of the vast majority of detentions that we see for foods coming into the US. Our full label comply service gives you one-on-one assistance with an experienced regulatory specialist who will do a complete evaluation of your ingredients and labeling. We conduct a thorough analysis of the label for each of the mandatory statements we've discussed today and make recommendations for changes to bring your label and product into compliance. We issue a report that includes all of our recommendations, and we have experienced graphic designers who will provide you with a print-ready graphic that is in compliance with FDA's labeling requirements. The service also includes a 30-day period where you can ask questions and an extra round of graphic changes to the revised label at no additional charge. If you're feeling pretty confident about your product label being compliant, but still want the reassurance of a group of experienced regulatory specialists looking it over, Registrar Corp offers our label check report option. Our team will look over the 10 mandatory elements that should appear on your conventional food label and give you guidance regarding any potential issues that we find, as well as instructions on what changes you should make prior to exporting it to the US. Our report will summarize the changes, and you will receive 30 minutes of consultation after delivery to go over our findings. If you're feeling pretty confident about your labeling but do want some help with that complicated nutrition facts label, Registrar Corp offers a service that will give you one-on-one assistance from a regulatory specialist who will help you figure out the proper reference amount and serving size for your product, as well as the proper modified label format that may be permitted for your product and your package. We will provide you with a print-ready graphic and a report that details each recommendation and each regulation that was used to develop your nutrition facts label. For companies that are still in the process of developing their formulations or that are concerned that their ingredients may not be approved in the US, Registrar Corp's Ingredients Review Service can provide peace of mind prior to export. We will review all of the ingredients in your products to verify that the ingredients are either affirmed as safe, approved as food additives, or approved as color additives by FDA. So you can save yourself the heartache of a refused shipment by ensuring that your ingredients are permitted before you export. Are you unsure whether your product's labels are compliant for the US market? We are here to help. You may send your product labels to us for a free assessment. We will check to see if they appear to have any compliance issues related to the mandatory labeling requirements that we've discussed today. We may also be able to see whether any of your ingredients might present issues as well. Our team of regulatory advisors will then provide you with our comments and our opinion regarding the status of your labels, and they can give you information regarding our services, just in case you need to change your labels or your formulation before you ship to the US. We have many other ways that we can help you as you export your foods to the US. Registrar Corp offers a full range of compliance services, all of which are fixed fee. We can assist you with many FDA requirements, such as food facility registration and US agent, prior notice, low acid and canned food requirements, food safety plans, and services to meet the requirements of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program if you're an importer. We can also help you if your products are being detained or are on an import alert. If you get detained, don't give up right away. Send us the FDA's notice of action for a free assessment, and we can look and see whether or not you may be able to get them released and how you might go about doing that. We look forward to assisting you with your successful exportation of your products to the US market. We have a special discount for you all as our thanks for attending our webinar today. You will receive $200 off the full label comply service or $100 off the label check service between now and November 1st. Simply mention it to your regulatory advisor and the discount will be applied. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. We really appreciate it, and I really hope that you found it helpful. And with that, we'll open up our webinar for any questions that you may have. Please feel free to add them to the Q&A box at the top of your screen. I will answer as many of them as I can, but if I don't get to yours, please feel free to reach out to us after the webinar is over. Okay, and with that, I will go ahead and let me move on over to our Q&A box. Please do feel free to add any questions that you may have. And I'm going to try and start with the first ones that got plugged in. Okay, so I see, will the recording of the webinar be available afterwards? We may be posting it on our website, and so you may still be able to access it. Also, if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm absolutely happy to clarify any of the issues and the topics that we've discussed today. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, next question. Is there a page where I can find if my ingredients are allowed in the USA? So FDA doesn't make it very easy, I'll be honest. The regulations are found in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations in several different sections of it. That you can find if you Google Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, it will lead you to it. I will warn you that it's actually really dense. There's a lot of information in there, so you do have to kind of know what you're looking for. Also on FDA's webpage, the other resources we talked about, there's information on color additives, that grouse notice inventory where it has all of the grouse notices that people have filed with FDA. It's kind of scattered around, but you can usually find it by going to the FDA webpage or the Code of Federal Regulations. Okay. Let's see. Is it possible to get presentation slides? I'll be honest, I don't know if we're going to be sending out the slides, but we'll probably be posting this on our website, and so you can find it there as well. And again, do reach out if you have any questions or there's anything that I can do for you. Let's see. Okay, next question. Is there a website to search for health claims that are authorized or not, according to the FDA? So the health claims are actually put into regulation, so they're pretty serious. FDA really does want to limit what can be said when you're referencing a disease, even if it's just a reduction in the risk of a disease. So those are all in the Code of Federal Regulations as well. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, let me go ahead and find our next one. Okay, where can I find the available standards of identity? Okay, so standards of identity are also in the Code of Federal Regulations. So they're usually within 130 and 169. That section of the CFR is where you find the standards of identity. And again, that's distinct from the statement of identity, which is the general identification of the product. The standard is when FDA says, okay, ice cream can contain these ingredients, it has to be made this way, and that's the only way you're allowed to call it ice cream. So if you have a product that is subject to a standard of identity and it doesn't meet that standard, you can still potentially market it, just so you know. You'll just have to call it by a different name. So we do this in label review all the time in my department. We'll have a product that doesn't qualify, maybe to be called, canned tuna. And so we have to go ahead and take a look at the ingredients and figure out, okay, what is a name that FDA may find appropriate. Okay, let's see. Next one. I'll be honest, I love this. This is my favorite part of webinars. So I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Let's see, the next question. Do vegetable seeds like radish seeds, squash seeds, etc., require FDA registration? So I am not sure whether or not they require FDA registration, I'll be honest, but what I can tell you is that they are mostly, if they're seeds for propagation, in other words, not seeds to be eaten, but for planting, then you're going to want to really focus your attentions on USDA. Because USDA does, because it's an agricultural issue, USDA really does have a lot of requirements for that. So yeah, focus your attention on USDA if you can. Okay, let's see. Okay, oh, good question. There are different labeling requirements for wholesale products sold to businesses rather than products sold directly to consumers. So excellent question. For products that are sold like business to business, most of the labeling requirements still have to be met with the exception of the nutrition facts panel. The same goes with anything that's sent for samples, or sometimes if you're doing marketing research like R&D and you're going to send over, 300 cans of tomato sauce that you want people to test out and see whether or not there's a market for it, those products still have to be in compliance with most of the labeling requirements we discussed, except not the nutrition facts panel. But you do also want to make sure that they are clearly marked as sample and not for retail sale. Okay. Okay, let's see. Next question. Is it mandatory to indicate the daily value of protein, fiber, carbohydrates, etc., whether or not a claim is made? And what about the percent daily value of vitamins and minerals? So FDA's nutrition chart has 15 mandatory nutrients that have to be declared, both macro and micronutrients. You are not required to declare the percent daily value for protein, though, because there's a very convoluted way that FDA wants that to be calculated. And if no claim is being made, then you're not required to do it, so you just leave that blank. The rest of the nutrients, though, except for calories, generally will require that you declare the percent daily value, and that needs to be based off of FDA's daily reference values and reference daily intake, not the RDA that's used in other markets. So you'll want to get your hands on FDA's values so that those percentages will be accurate. Okay, let's see. Next question. Let's see. To use a protein claim, I have to comply with a minimum percent DV established. Is there other evaluation that can be made, like amino acid profiles and others? So for protein claims, if you're going to make a good source of protein or a high in protein claim, then you do have to meet minimum percentages, usually 10% for a good claim. For a rich in or a high in, you have to meet the 20% threshold, again, based off of the percent daily value. For individual amino acids, you are permitted to declare the actual quantitative amount of an amino acid, but you can't characterize it as being like high in alanine or something like that. You can't use a term like high or good source. You can only declare the actual quantitative amount, in milligrams or whatever unit of measure. And that's because FDA doesn't have a daily amount established for individual amino acids. Okay, let's see. All right, the next question is it a requirement for FDA that the source of lecithins be mentioned in the list of ingredients when this is not sourced from soy? as soy always needs to be labeled as an allergen. So lecithin does appear in regulation just as lecithin. We usually encourage people to go ahead and identify the source, if it's sunflower or soy or whatever the source is for it, just to make sure it's clear. The FDA gives their inspectors a lot of enforcement discretion in port. And so it's common for us to encounter inspectors who, because of their own opinion, think that a particular ingredient's not declared correctly, and they'll detain it. And then you're stuck trying to prove that what you've got on your label is correct. And even if you're right, it can still take a few weeks in order to get it out of detention. We do this a couple of times a year for people, where the FDA inspector has said, no, your label's not right. And we go, oh, yes, it is. So, you can still get it released, but it's a hassle. And so in cases like this, we would say just be as specific as you can regarding the identity of the ingredient. Same thing, I would say, with colors. So certain colors, like if they're not the FD&C colors, then you can just call it artificial color on the label, if it's caramel or beet juice or whatever. Problem is that then FDA will wonder what that color is and if it's permitted. And if if they decide that they want to hold it and detain it and wait for an answer, then you've lost a couple of weeks in your shipping. So again, we suggest naming all of your colors as well, even if the regulation doesn't require it. Okay. Let's see, if we export a raw material for food, must we apply the same labeling requirements? So basically, we recommend all of these be followed except for the nutrition facts panel for a raw material. Okay, let's see. Okay, so what are the CFR numbers related to labeling? So the general labeling requirements are in 101, but you find that there are other labeling requirements sort of sprinkled throughout the food section. In subpart A and B, the standards of identity, for example, are in the 130s to the 160s. They may have labeling requirements embedded in them. You really do have to check kind of every individual part of the label and your ingredient list. Okay, next question is, if you know that your ingredient is not bioengineered, are you permitted to omit the declaration? Yes, if you have an ingredient that is on, say, like corn or soy, or I think there's some squash varieties that are on the USDA list, and you know for a fact and can prove that they are not GMO, then you are permitted to omit that USDA declaration. But you want to keep that data close at hand just in case the USDA asks when you import the product, whether or not it's a GMO ingredient. Okay, let's see. For the net quantity and abbreviation of ounces, can it be disclosed in lowercase letters like 200 ounces? Yes. In fact, we prefer that because, we're science geeks. We're kind of regulatory nerds. We believe in being very exact, and units of measurement like ounce and kilogram and gram are usually lowercase letters within the scientific community. And so we would recommend being that exact, where you keep the lowercase unit of measure for those values on your label. Okay, let's see. The next question. Let's see, if some of these, I'm sorry, are kind of duplicates, so I'm just going to try and find one that's new. Okay, let's see. If the packaging is very small and the information to the right of the PDP is too small to add the 3 mandatory statements, and this is somebody who knows their labeling, and the next panel adjacent to the right is the back of the packaging. Is it possible to label the list of ingredients, nutritional information, and the manufacturer's address on this area? Thank you. This is somebody who definitely knows their labeling. And without seeing, I can't make a definitive determination. But what I can say is that, yes, if there are modifications to the requirements for small packaging that certainly allow you to not use the panel immediately to the right of the principal display panel, and to break up some of that information so that you can fit everything. And so that might mean the nutrition chart on the panel to the right and then the rest of the information on the back. In a case like that, we would just go over the regulations very carefully, because you have to go to the section on the information panel as well as the section on nutrition labeling to really determine where everything would need to go. Okay, let's see. Okay, the next question. If I use the claim made with real cheese, do I have to indicate the percent of cheese in the ingredients list? Unlike the EU, no. Actually, FDA doesn't have any requirements for statements like that. If you say made with real milk or made with real cheese, of course it has to be in the ingredients list, but there's no percent declaration that's required as part of that. So generally speaking, percentage declarations in ingredients list in the US are actually pretty much voluntary. I can't really think of a case where one is actually required. Let's see. Can't find. Okay. Okay, can we have some examples of agents approved by FDA that can approve an organic product? So the organic claim is actually regulated by USDA, and even when it's applied to an FDA product. And that's just because they're the ones that set the standards for organic farming and that sort of thing. So if you go to the USDA webpage, they have a list of their certifying agents. You just Google it on their search bar and you can find it pretty easily. And so that's how you can quickly find exactly who, and there are a lot of companies like EcoCert is what kind of jumps to mind. But yeah, that's where you can find all of that information so you can make sure it's properly certified. Now, USDA has some memoranda of understanding with certain areas, like the EU, where if it's certified organic in the EU, you do not have to go through a separate certification process here. And so if you're in the EU or an area that has the memorandum of understanding with USDA, then you want to make sure you know about that, because it'll save you some extra hassle that you don't have to go through. And let's see. Okay, does the FDA require showing the percentage of ingredients that have in the name of the product? So again, yeah, you don't have to declare the percentage of the ingredient if you're calling it, protein bar or something like that. That's kind of a claim, but that you would have to substantiate. But as far as declaring the percentage of the protein ingredients, then you wouldn't have to worry about that. Again, generally speaking, percentages are pretty voluntary for the ingredients list according to FDA rules. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I see I have a question on the country of origin, but the question's not here. So I'll just kind of give you some general information about country of origin. So it's for foreign articles that are coming into port. So it does not apply to a product that is manufactured in the US, even if the raw materials come from overseas. It's the country where the last substantial transformation took place. So, for example, if you have a product that is manufactured in, let's say, Romania, but then it's filled in Italy, it's not transformed, it's just filled in Italy, Romania stays the country of origin. It does not become Italy just because it was filled in Italy. Okay, let's see. Okay, if our product shows bilingual only the name of the product, does it require to show bilingual for the other information? So the answer to this is yes. And this is a very common situation with products that come into the US where the name of the product maybe is in a different language. And the rationale behind requiring it to be bilingual is that if you have, a resident of the US that only speaks that language and they're only able to read the name of the product, they can't read everything else that FDA wants them to read. And so that means, they can't get the nutrition information, the ingredients list, and so forth. So if you have a language, a non-English language is attracting the attention of a non-English speaker, and FDA wants you to go ahead and reproduce all the information in both languages. Okay, let's see. Okay, are there any exemptions with regards to the mandatory nutritional data and ingredients? For example, for liquors like vodka. Okay, good question. So there's certain exemptions for mandatory nutrition labeling. I'll start with the FDA. Certain products like coffee don't have nutrient value once it's brewed. That's going to be exempt. Tea is the same way. So unless you're making claims, you don't have to have a nutrition chart for those types of products. Liquors like beer, most wines, and distilled spirits, those are actually regulated by the Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau. They're not FDA. They don't have nutrition labeling requirements. And that's why you don't see nutrition charts on most wines unless they're low alcohol, in which case they're regulated by the FDA. So for those, no need to actually do the nutrition chart or put the nutrition chart on the label, but you are subject to TTB labeling requirements. Okay. Now I see some people are raising hands. If you could just put the questions in the box. I'm probably going to go over. I'm going to go past 11, at least a few minutes beyond there, so I can try to get to as many of these as possible. And again, if I don't get to your question, please do reach out. We actually had like 2,000 registrants today, which is so exciting. And I'm so excited that we got such a great response, but it means there are lots of questions, but I don't want to leave anybody hanging. So please do reach out if we don't get to your question today. Okay. Another good question. As a food importer, do I need to have the FDA registration? So if you are taking possession of the food, if you're not a broker, but you actually are the importer taking possession of the food, putting it in your warehouse, then you are required to have the FDA facility registration. For a preserved tomato puree, should we use grams an ounce or fluid ounce and milliliters? So this is a very good question. And it really may end up being a sort of a judgment call on your part. Generally speaking, solid, semi-solid, viscous are declared by weight. Liquid is declared by volume. But FDA does allow, if there's a trade custom, like a clearly demonstrated trade custom, for declaring like a solid or semi-solid by volume or the reverse, then you are permitted to do that. But it would need to be something that's just generally done within your industry. Okay. Okay, let's see. Is there a source to read all of the requirements for bilingual labels? So in essence, it's just simply whatever is required to appear in English is required to appear in whatever language you're putting on the label. So some people will make, an English panel and then a non-English panel. Some people will combine the information. FDA seems to allow for both approaches, but you do have to make sure that both sets of information are complete. Okay, now the question, would these requirements be for food service as well? Food service can be exempt from the nutrition facts label unless you're making claims. So if you were selling 1,000 muffins to like a Hyatt hotel or something, you wouldn't have to have the nutrition chart unless you're calling them low-fat muffins or including some other sort of claim or nutrition information about them. Let's see. Are there any exceptions regarding labels for ethnic stores? There actually aren't any exceptions for ethnic stores or stores that are marketing to a particular ethnic population within the U.S. What we do see is that stickers are pretty common on these products. In essence, they want, people want to bring in brands and products, from their homeland that they know people also from that country will recognize and want to purchase. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you can put stickers on. You just have to make sure that they're complete. You also have, I recommend making bilingual stickers simply because a lot of time, like if you're bringing in something from Poland or from Ecuador, you're going to still see Polish and Spanish on the label. And so I would recommend bilingual stickers so that FDA will see that all the mandatory information has been declared in both languages. Let's see. Okay, question, do we have compliance for Canadian regulations? Yes, actually we do. We do labeling for Canadian products. the French and English, all the different formats. So we do Canadian label reviews. Also excited to tell you that in the next year or so, maybe even in the next 6 months, we'll be moving into labeling for the Mexican market. So I'm kind of jokingly calling it NAFTA label review. But yeah, if you have products that are destined for those markets, we'll be adding those services. We already do Canada, but we'll be adding Mexico soon as well, and really excited about this development. Okay, let's see. So if you're exporting to the British Virgin Islands, U.S. British Virgin Islands from Puerto Rico, will apply the same FDA rules. So for the Virgin Islands, I'll confess I'm not sure. I know with Puerto Rico, FDA rules still apply. So if you're bringing products into Puerto Rico, you will have to have all of these mandatory labeling statements. However, the exception is for Puerto Rico or any U.S. territory where English is not the primary language, you may have a label that only has that language. So for example, in Puerto Rico, Spanish is the predominant language. You can have Spanish only labels in Puerto Rico. However, still has to meet all of the mandatory labeling content that we've described today. Let's see, how should we handle the precautionary contamination declaration? Say a vegan product that might include traces of eggs just because the facility is not egg-free. Excellent question. So we touched upon, the allergen declaration that is required, and that only deals with products for allergens that are actual ingredients. It doesn't address cross-contamination, like being on the same line as, where products with peanuts maybe, were processed. And so they call it advisory labeling. There are no rules from FDA about it, nothing formal. They've commented about it, kind of said, yeah, it's, we understand industry does this. It doesn't replace the need for, strict GMPs, and companies absolutely should do their best to prevent it, but it's permitted. Most people think it's a good idea, just so that if a consumer is allergic to a particular allergen, you don't want them to be exposed to it inadvertently. So yeah, if you want to add advisory labeling, you certainly may want to go ahead and do that. It's permitted. Most people will put something like, produced on equipment that also processes, and then puts that allergen or a similar statement. And FDA says that's totally fine. Let's see a question about whether this applies to aqua feed. So animal feed, pet food is actually all regulated by FDA as well. They also work in conjunction with the Association of American Feed Control Officials regarding the labeling elements that should be present. So if you have products intended for animals, know that you're subject to FDA requirements as well. We help with those. We do label reviews for products, and we incorporate both FDA as well as the guidelines from the Association of American Feed Control Officials. And so we can help you with that too if you need it. Let's see. Another question about exporting pet treats directly to the U.S. Do the full FDA labeling requirements apply? So again, these are, for human food is what we've discussed today, but there are specific requirements for animal feed. A fair amount of it is from FDA, ingredients, statement of identity, and so forth. But then AFCO, Association of American Feed Control Officials, they have what up to now has been called a guaranteed analysis statement that pet food usually has. They're in the process right now of changing over to a pet food like nutrition box that has just come out this spring. It hasn't been implemented by the states and at the federal level, yes, yet. So it's still very, very new, but know that you do have to pay attention to the labeling requirements for pet food if you're sending it to the US. Let's see. Okay, so any ice cream that we found in the supermarket has a statement of identity as described by Part 135, frozen desserts. Okay, so Part 135 is the frozen dessert section. That's the standard of identity for those types of products. So ice cream and sherbet and so forth. And so, yeah, if your product actually conforms to any of those descriptions, then that's the name you will use. If it does not, then you need to kind of find a different name for it. We see things like lactose and dairy dessert is pretty common to describe ice cream that doesn't meet the ice cream standard. So again, you can still market it. You just have to find a truthful, not misleading name, but one that doesn't violate the standard or call it by that standard. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a medical device question. It says we're producing elastic ligature mixed with an antibiotic to reduce the risk of decay in orthodontics. Does this mean we have to be subject to FDA approval? So Registrar Corp has services for drugs and medical devices as well. Didn't touch on those today. My group does oversee reviews for those types of products if you need assistance. We also have registration and listing groups for drugs and devices. If you need assistance with those types of products, Registrar Corp is absolutely here to help. And so reach out to us. We have regulatory advisors and teams dedicated to those types of products. Let's see. Okay, question about green coffee beans and needing FDA. If they are intended for food, then they're subject to all the same requirements. If they're being shipped in bulk, then you're not going to need to have the nutrition chart, but you will have to have the remainder of the information that we've talked about today. Let's see. Okay, question about for color and flavor ingredients added to the product, which labeling regulations should be used. As I mentioned before, for colors, usually we recommend declaring by the common or usual name, so caramel, beet juice, fruit juice, and so forth. In those cases, you have to designate that it's a color, so fruit juice color, caramel color, something like that, titanium dioxide color. If it's an FD&C color for food, FD&C red number 40, then you would declare it that way. Flavors are usually declared by natural flavor or artificial flavor. Do note that there's no such thing as I'm trying to remember what it's sometimes called, nature synthetic color or natural identical color or something like that. I'm sorry, but I know I've seen it on labels where it's a synthetic color, but it's made so that it's the exact chemical composition and structure of the natural form, but it's still considered synthetic. So it's either natural or artificial on a US FDA label. Okay, let's see. All right, let's see. Okay, good question. Are there portions per food indicated in the RAC, which is mandatory? So the RAC is the reference amount customarily consumed. It's a baseline reference amount that FDA has for all different types of food: bread, ice cream, syrups, coffee, beverages, everything. And so that is sort of your starting point as you're determining what your serving size should be. There is a very convoluted group of regulations in 21 CFR 101.9 that deals with this. If you need assistance with determining your rack and what your serving size will be, I would strongly recommend using one of our labeling services to figure it out. Okay, let's see. Is the GRAS FDA list open to the public? Yes, it's in the GRAS notice inventory, can be found easily on their page. Also, within the regulations, you find where FDA has affirmed certain ingredients as GRAS. Okay, let's see. Okay, there's a question about other countries ruled by FDA. Is there a web page that lists them? So FDA is specific to the US market, but I imagine there may be other markets that mimic what the FDA does. So whatever country you're exporting to or you're marketing in, you'll want to check with the local authorities to determine what those requirements are going to be. Okay, do we also work with topical cosmetic ingredients to determine if they're allowable? Yes, we have services related to cosmetic labeling, cosmetic formulation. There are new requirements for cosmetics for registration and listing. We have teams dedicated to helping with this. So if you are marketing cosmetics, please reach out to us because we have just a ton of new services that we've developed in the last 2 years or so. FDA or Congress passed the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act of 2022 and imposed a whole bunch of new requirements on cosmetic companies. So please, if you have any questions about that, reach out to Registrar Corp. We are absolutely here to help. Okay, all right, I'm going to go for a few more minutes. And again, if I don't get to your question, please reach out and ask. We have a ton of people, teams dedicated to helping you. Let's see, for color batch certification, do you mean each batch that contains a specific color needs to get certified before arriving in the entry port? So yes, the way that this works is that before it is actually added to a product. So for example, if you have FD&C red number 40, Allura red, whoever manufactured it or whoever receives, the 55-gallon drum of Allura red literally has to draw a sample, send it to FDA for testing. You have to pay a fee for that, get it certified before you add it to your product. You can't certify after it's already been added because it's been mixed in with the product. So the easiest thing to do for manufacturers, I think personally, is simply find someone who's getting it certified by FDA. You have huge color additive manufacturers, many of whom are probably doing this. You just want to make sure that you are buying a certified batch. The FDA will issue a unique lot number for that batch. You need to demand that lot number from the supplier so that you can be sure and you can prove to FDA that the colors you used were certified. So the detention I mentioned that I was looking at this morning, this is their problem. They have FD&C colors. I don't know that they got them certified, and if they can't prove it to FDA, FDA will refuse the shipment. And it's something like 40,000 pounds of multicolored jelly beans or something. I mean, it's a serious amount of product that's going to be refused and sent back if they can't prove that it's certified, and I don't think that it is. And it disappoints me to say so because, again, our label comply product review would have told them this if they had done their compliance check prior to shipping. These are the types of situations that emerge. And, if you're not prepared, then your shipment, may be refused entry to the US, which is just not good for anyone. Let's see. Okay. Question about nutrient values for flavor labeling. So if you have a flavor, like a mint flavor or, imitation vanilla flavoring or something like that, usually these are exempt because they're used in such small amounts that they don't have any nutrients. And so FDA actually uses flavor extracts as an example of products that, generally speaking, probably will not require a nutrition facts panel. The rest of the requirements do apply, though. Okay, let's see. Okay, can you explain more about E numbers or INS numbers? So, E numbers and INS numbers are used in other markets to denote usually food additives and colors and things like that. So, E102 may be Brilliant Blue FCF. They use these numbers on labels and ingredients lists instead of the actual name. But this isn't appropriate for FDA. So when you're developing your label for the US market, you need to replace your E number or your INS number with the name of the actual ingredient. So whatever chemical compound or substance that you're adding. Let's see. Okay, so next question, should soluble coffee make a nutritional declaration? So this will all depend on whether or not, I assume you mean like instant coffee, add it to water. In this particular case, what you'll need to do is just verify that there's no nutrient value once it's been added, and if there isn't any, then you don't have to have the nutrition chart. Okay, I'm going to try and get in one more before I'm afraid we'll probably have to wrap it up, but again, do reach out to us if we can help with anything. Okay. Okay, good question. If the ingredient is not mentioned in a specific CFR, but is mentioned in a GRAS study where the FDA states it can be used, can we use it in the formulation of a product? So for the GRAS status, you may have an affirmation from FDA in regulation that says it is GRAS for a particular use. You may also encounter a GRAS notice where a company has filed and said it's GRAS for a particular use, and FDA doesn't question their conclusion. And if your intended use matches those, you may be able to, in essence, rely on those to support that your product is GRAS or your ingredient is GRAS. If the intended uses are very different, then, or the product is different than how you're using it, it may be in your best interest to go ahead and find a panel of experts to review your use in your product and make sure that it would be considered generally recognized as safe. You could also file your own GRAS notice with FDA. We don't have services for this, but we can point you in the direction of people who do. And if you decide that you want to do this just for peace of mind before you actually ship the product. Okay. All right, I'm going to try and find one more before we have to wrap up. Let's see. Question is, if I need to declare turmeric in the ingredients list, how do you do this? So turmeric as an ingredient would be declared as turmeric. If you're using it as a color additive, then you would add color to it. If you're using it as a spice or for some other purpose, then you would just declare it by the common or usual name. Okay. Okay. Well, and with that, I'm afraid we are going to have to wrap up. I really want to thank everyone for participating today, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to do these and, to be able to provide useful information to industry. Registrar Corp is here as your partner. We are here to provide information and services as you may need them. And you should never hesitate to reach out to us. We have teams and we have a 24-hour live chat that you can access that is monitored. So please do reach out to us as you either start exporting or continue to export. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all today. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.